The silver necklace slipped from beneath the single father's shirt as he bent to pick up his daughter's fallen backpack, and for one impossible second, Billionaire CEO Serafina Vale forgot how to breathe. The pendant caught the bright morning sunlight streaming through the glass lobby of Vale Aeronautics, revealing a tiny compass engraved with 3 initials. RAV. Serafina knew every scratch on that necklace. She knew the faint dent near the clasp and the uneven line her late husband had carved into the back during a camping trip years ago. It had been around Ronan Vale's neck on the day his private plane disappeared over the mountains. No wreckage had ever been recovered. No belongings had ever been found. Yet now, 4 years later, his necklace was resting against the chest of a struggling single father she had never seen before. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Hope if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the possibility that even the deepest pain can lead us toward an unexpected truth. The man quickly tucked the necklace beneath his faded blue work shirt, unaware that Serafina was staring at him from across the lobby. His name was Callum Reyes, a 36-year-old maintenance technician with tired eyes, rough hands, and the guarded posture of someone accustomed to apologizing for taking up space. Beside him stood his 9-year-old daughter, Maris, clutching a worn purple backpack and watching the marble-floored lobby with nervous fascination. It was just after 9 in the morning, and bright daylight poured over the polished walls, the towering indoor trees, and the enormous Silver Company logo hanging above reception. Employees in tailored suits moved around them in quick, purposeful streams, while Callum stood near the security desk trying to explain why he had brought his daughter to work. Her school had closed unexpectedly because of a burst water pipe, his elderly neighbor was at a medical appointment, and he could not afford to miss another shift. His supervisor had already warned him that one more absence could cost him the job. Serafina had arrived early for an investor presentation, surrounded by executives who were discussing quarterly projections, but their voices faded into meaningless noise. Her eyes remained fixed on Callum. Ronan's necklace had been custom-made by Serafina's grandfather. There was no second copy. It had never been sold, photographed publicly, or reproduced. Only a handful of people had even known about the hidden engraving. Her first instinct was anger. Her second was fear. By the time Callum and Maris stepped toward the service elevator, Serafina had already told her chief of staff to cancel her morning meeting and discreetly bring the maintenance employee to her office. Callum entered the top-floor executive suite 20 minutes later expecting to be dismissed. He had left Maris with the receptionist and spent the elevator ride rehearsing how he would beg for one more chance. His rent was 11 days overdue. The electricity company had sent a final notice. Maris needed new glasses, and the soles of her shoes were beginning to separate near the toes. He could not lose this job, especially not after spending 8 months searching for steady work. When he entered Serafina's sunlit office, he was surprised to find no human resources manager waiting for him. Serafina stood alone beside the enormous windows overlooking the city, her hands trembling despite her composed expression. She asked him about the necklace. Callum's face changed immediately. His shoulders stiffened, and his fingers moved protectively toward the chain beneath his shirt. He said it belonged to someone who had saved his life. Serafina pressed him for a name, but Callum hesitated, sensing that the question carried far more weight than simple curiosity. When he finally pulled the pendant into view, Serafina stepped closer and turned it over. The 3 initials were there, along with the tiny mountain symbol Ronan had carved himself. Her knees weakened. She had spent 4 years trying to accept that the man she loved had vanished without a trace, only for a stranger to appear inside her company wearing the one object that should have disappeared with him. Callum explained that 4 years earlier, he had been working as a volunteer wilderness medic in northern Colorado. At that time, his wife, Nadine, was still alive, and Maris was 5 years old. Callum had joined a search and rescue unit after losing his construction job, hoping the certification would lead to stable emergency work. One clear autumn afternoon, his team received reports of possible aircraft debris in a remote mountain region. A storm had passed through the night before, but the day itself was bright, cold, and unusually calm. Callum and another volunteer hiked for hours through steep terrain before discovering a badly injured man near a ravine. The stranger had a fractured leg, severe dehydration, and burns along one arm. He had no wallet or identification, only the compass necklace around his neck. Serafina's heart pounded as Callum continued. The injured man had been conscious for only brief moments. He seemed confused and repeatedly asked about someone named Sarah. He also spoke about an aircraft malfunction and insisted that others might still be nearby. Callum radioed their coordinates, but a rockslide cut off the main rescue route. While attempting to move the injured stranger to safer ground, Callum lost his footing near the edge of the ravine. The stranger, despite his injuries, grabbed Callum's harness and prevented him from falling. The effort worsened the man's condition. Before losing consciousness, he removed the necklace and pressed it into Callum's hand, telling him that if he did not survive, Callum had to protect what mattered most. Serafina demanded to know what happened next. Callum looked down, shame and grief crossing his face. A second rockslide separated him from the injured man. Callum was struck by falling debris and woke nearly a day later in a rescue helicopter. Search crews returned to the ravine but found only blood, torn fabric, and evidence that someone had moved through the trees. They assumed the injured man had fallen into the river below or been swept away during the night. Callum gave the authorities every detail he remembered, but the location was more than 80 miles from the official search area for Ronan Vale's missing plane. No connection was made. Callum had not known the man's identity, and because the necklace carried only initials, investigators listed it as an unidentified personal item. Serafina struggled to understand why Callum had kept it. His answer was painfully simple. He had tried to turn it over to local authorities, but during his hospitalization, the necklace remained with his personal belongings. Weeks later, Nadine was diagnosed with an aggressive neurological illness. Their lives collapsed into medical appointments, unpaid bills, and desperate attempts to keep their family together. Callum placed the necklace in a drawer and forgot about it until the day Nadine died 2 years later. That morning, overwhelmed by grief and terrified of raising Maris alone, he found the pendant while searching for insurance documents. Remembering the injured stranger's courage, he began wearing it as a reminder that even a broken person could still save someone else. Serafina wanted to believe him, but years of betrayal in the corporate world had taught her to question every emotional story. She ordered a private security review of Callum's background and contacted the original rescue authorities. While her staff searched archived reports, Callum returned to the maintenance department, convinced he had just made the worst mistake of his life. By lunchtime, whispers had begun circulating that the CEO had personally interrogated him. His supervisor told him to wait in the staff cafeteria until further notice. Callum sat alone beside the wide windows, watching Maris draw pictures on scrap paper under the bright midday sun. She drew a small house, a smiling woman with wings, and a man wearing a necklace. Callum swallowed hard when she pushed the picture toward him and said she had drawn their family, including the mountain man who had helped make sure her father came home. Upstairs, Serafina received confirmation that a report had been filed exactly as Callum described. The archived record mentioned an unidentified male survivor, estimated to be in his late 30s, with injuries consistent with an aircraft crash. It also documented Callum's fall, the rockslide, and the unsuccessful search that followed. More disturbing was a detail Serafina's private investigators uncovered in Vale Aeronautics' internal records. Ronan's plane had not simply suffered a mechanical failure. 3 days before the disappearance, an engineer had flagged suspicious changes to the flight control software. The warning had been quietly buried by someone with executive access. At the time, Serafina had assumed the crash was an accident. Now there was evidence that her husband may have been deliberately targeted. The security team found something else. A remote clinic 50 miles from the ravine had treated an unidentified injured man 2 days after Callum's rescue. According to handwritten notes, the patient had arrived with a group of seasonal workers, suffered memory loss, and left before authorities could question him. No photograph had been taken, but the patient had a surgical scar on his shoulder matching Ronan's medical history. Serafina stared at the report until the words blurred. For 4 years, she had mourned beside an empty grave. She had blamed herself for not insisting that Ronan cancel his flight. Now she was being forced to consider the impossible. He might have survived. Callum was summoned again, but this time Serafina came down to the cafeteria herself. Employees stopped eating as the Billionaire CEO walked through the room toward the maintenance worker and his daughter. Serafina sat across from Callum and placed the archived rescue report on the table. Her voice was quieter now. She told him that the injured man's name was Ronan Vale and that he had been her husband. Callum looked at the necklace as though it had suddenly become too heavy to wear. He immediately removed it and offered it back, apologizing for keeping something so precious. Serafina closed his hand around the pendant and said Ronan had given it to him for a reason. Until they understood what that reason was, it belonged with Callum. Maris, who had been listening silently, asked whether the mountain man might still be alive. Neither adult knew how to answer, but her innocent question became the spark Serafina needed. By early afternoon, she had assembled a private investigation team, reopened the crash inquiry, and placed Callum on paid leave so he could help reconstruct the rescue route. For the first time in years, Callum was not treated as an inconvenience or a disposable worker. Serafina listened to every detail he remembered, the injured man's broken sentences, the direction of the footprints, the workers he had heard in the distance, and the faded logo on a canvas bag near the ravine. The logo belonged to a rehabilitation charity operating rural clinics across several states. Serafina's investigators traced medical transfers from the clinic that had treated the unidentified man. One record led to a long-term neurological facility in New Mexico, where a patient named Rowan Vale had been admitted without confirmed identification. The similarity of the name looked like coincidence until they viewed the intake details. The patient had been found disoriented, suffered severe memory impairment, and carried no belongings. He had spent years relearning basic skills and had only recently begun recalling fragments of his former life. One recurring fragment was a woman's name, Sarah. 2 days later, under the clear light of a late morning, Serafina, Callum, and Maris arrived at the rehabilitation center. The building stood beyond a quiet courtyard filled with desert flowers and sunlit stone paths. Serafina's confidence disappeared as soon as she stepped out of the car. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without hesitation, but she could barely walk toward the entrance. Callum stayed beside her, not as an employee, but as someone who understood what it meant to live between hope and grief. Ronan was sitting beneath a shaded terrace when they saw him. His hair was longer and streaked with gray. A scar crossed the side of his forehead. He appeared thinner, older, and more fragile than the man in Serafina's memories, yet she recognized him instantly. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Ronan stood unsteadily, staring at her as though she had stepped out of a dream he had been trying to remember. Serafina crossed the courtyard and held him, crying with a sound that seemed to carry every lonely night, every unanswered question, and every year she had spent pretending to be strong. Ronan remembered Callum only in fragments, but when he saw the compass necklace, his hand moved instinctively toward it. Over the following hours, pieces of the truth emerged. Someone inside Vale Aeronautics had sabotaged the plane to prevent Ronan from exposing financial corruption tied to the company's former chief operating officer. The crash killed the pilot, but Ronan survived and wandered through the mountains before Callum found him. After the rockslide, frightened workers discovered Ronan and transported him to a rural clinic. Because of his head injury, he could not provide his identity. A corrupt employee connected to the sabotage later learned that a possible survivor had been found and manipulated records to keep him hidden, fearing Ronan would eventually remember the truth. The former executive was arrested after investigators uncovered payments, altered maintenance logs, and falsified medical transfers. Yet the greatest transformation did not happen inside a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened between Serafina and Callum. She finally understood that the necklace had not appeared to torment her. It had traveled through grief to guide her back to the truth. Callum had carried Ronan's last act of courage through the hardest years of his life, while Ronan had survived partly because a struggling volunteer medic refused to leave an injured stranger behind. Serafina promoted Callum, but not as charity. She created a new safety and emergency response division and placed him in a leadership role because his integrity had already been tested under the worst circumstances. She also established a support fund for employees facing family emergencies, ensuring that no parent would ever again be forced to choose between caring for a child and keeping a job. Callum used his first bonus to pay his rent, replace Maris's glasses, and buy her a new pair of shoes. The day he received the promotion, he visited Nadine's grave beneath the warm afternoon sun and told her that somehow, after all the darkness, their daughter was finally going to be okay. Ronan's recovery took time. Some memories never returned completely, but his love for Serafina did. Callum and Maris became part of their extended family, joined not by wealth or status, but by a necklace and a moment of courage on a mountain. On the first anniversary of Ronan's return, the four of them hiked a gentle trail near the rehabilitation center. At the viewpoint, Ronan removed the silver compass and placed it around Callum's neck once more. He explained that the pendant had always been meant to remind its wearer that when life destroys the path ahead, kindness can still point the way home. If this story touched your heart, please support the video by liking, sharing, subscribing to Echoes of Hope, and leaving a comment. Your engagement helps stories of kindness, courage, and second chances reach people who may desperately need hope today. Before the ending, please comment, "Kindness can guide us home," to honor every ordinary person whose compassion changes a life without expecting recognition. As the afternoon light settled over the trail, Serafina watched Ronan walk beside the single father who had unknowingly carried the last piece of their lost life. Maris ran a few steps ahead, laughing as the compass pendant flashed in the sun. For years earlier, that necklace had seemed like the final symbol of death. Now it represented survival, friendship, and the astonishing truth that hope sometimes returns through the hands of a stranger. Callum had believed he was merely carrying a reminder of the man who once saved him. In the end, he had been carrying the key that brought an entire family back together.